What does that mean?
Under current law, at the moment of your death, when you pass that massive accumulated real estate portfolio to your heirs, the tax basis of those properties is stepped up to their current fair market value on the day you die.
Wait, let me make sure I'm understanding this. If I bought a building 40 years ago for $100,000 and I 1031 exchanged my way up to a $10 million apartment complex, I have deferred taxes on $9.9 million of profit.
Wow.
When I die, my kids inherit the $10 million building.
Yes, and because of the step up in basis, the IRS treats it as if your kids bought the building today for $10 million.
Are you serious?
I'm serious. All of that historical deferred tax liability, the decades of depreciation recapture, the capital gains, it is completely wiped out. It evaporates. The slate is wiped clean. Your heirs can turn around and sell that $10 million building the very next day, and they would owe virtually zero capital gains taxes.
That is the ultimate generational reset button. You are taking this massive, highly leveraged empire, encasing it in a magical tax-proof vault, and handing it to the next generation completely sanitized of its tax liabilities.
It really is.
Even if you aren't thinking about passing on estates yet, just knowing that these mechanisms exist completely alters the math of why you buy property in the first place. Wealth isn't just about the cash flow you earn. It is heavily dependent on what you legally protect from taxation over a lifetime.
But we have to introduce a massive warning sign here.
Because it's not all sunshine and rainbows.
Exactly. Because when novice investors learn about cost segregation, 231 exchanges, and infinite leverage, they suffer from a specific psychological pathology: greed. They realize that debt is tax-advantaged, so they decide to acquire as much debt as humanly possible.
And this leads us to the dark side of the hidden engine. What happens when investors get intoxicated by these tax incentives and start ignoring the fundamental reality of the physical real estate market?
This is a crucial pivot, because the math we just discussed works beautifully on a spreadsheet. But spreadsheets don't have panic attacks. Spreadsheets don't deal with global pandemics, and spreadsheets don't experience market crashes. Let's look at what happened during the post-COVID boomtown era.
Oh man, that was a wild time.
During that specific window, the market experienced unprecedented anomalies. Interest rates plummeted to historic lows, and prices went up incredibly fast. Some markets saw 30% to 40% appreciation in a 24-month window. And human psychology is highly susceptible to FOMO, the fear of missing out. People started operating under the delusion that real estate only goes up, and that the fundamental rules of economic gravity no longer applied.
The logic was infectious. If owning one rental house makes you wealthy, then aggressively leveraging yourself to buy 30 rental houses will make you a billionaire by next Tuesday. The strategy shifted from buy quality assets to simply acquire doors at all costs.
Exactly. The obsession with door count became a metric of vanity, and because they were so desperate to acquire these doors before prices went up again, investors started ignoring all the basic fundamentals of real estate: location, layout, neighborhood quality, and basic desirability. They engaged in reckless acquisition.
There is a highly specific, chilling example of this behavior that perfectly illustrates the danger. A buyer is walking through a new townhome development during the peak of the frenzy. They are ecstatic because they found a handful of units that the builder is selling for $20,000 less than the other units in the exact same complex. The buyer thinks they are a genius. They think they just found built-in equity.
But they fail to ask the fundamental question: why are those units $20,000 cheaper?
Right.
The builder isn't running a charity. They are cheaper because they possess fatal, unchangeable flaws. Perhaps the living room window doesn't look out over the park. It faces the neighbor's concrete garage wall, blocking all natural light. Or perhaps the architectural layout is a disaster.
Yeah, the example mentioned there were like 8 awkward stairs leading directly from the kitchen down into the garage.
Yes, effectively turning a 2-car garage into a useless 1.5-car garage because you can't open a car door without hitting the staircase.
Now, when the market is red hot and we have a severe housing shortage, you can get away with this. If someone needs a roof over their head and there are 50 applicants for every rental, they will rent the dark unit with the awkward garage. But real estate is cyclical. The moment the market cools down even slightly and renters suddenly have choices again, what happens?
The music stops. The renter, who is paying $2,500 a month for the unit facing the brick wall, realizes they can move 3 doors down and rent a unit with a park view for the exact same price. They move out. And suddenly your discounted unit becomes the absolute last property in the entire neighborhood to rent. It becomes an unrentable, empty liability.
And here's the brutal, unforgiving math of over-leveraging. Let's say you drank the Kool-Aid and bought 27 units willy-nilly during the boom to boost your door count. You maximized your leverage. The market shifts, the renters get picky, and suddenly 11 of your units are sitting entirely vacant because they are the least desirable units in their respective markets. You aren't collecting rent on 11 properties.
But the bank does not care about your vacancy rate. The city does not care. The HOA does not care. You are still personally on the hook for the commercial mortgages, the property taxes, the insurance premiums, and the HOA fees on all 11 of those empty properties every single month.
If you do the math on 11 vacant properties, you could easily be facing a catastrophic monthly burn rate. You are writing a check for $25,000 or $30,000 every single month out of your personal reserves just to keep the lights on for empty buildings.
And this exposes the most dangerous myth in real estate,
Yeah.
the confusion between equity and liquidity. You could theoretically have $1 million of equity trapped inside those 27 houses on paper. But if your debt service coverage ratio, your DSCR, drops below 1.0, meaning your income no longer covers your debt obligations, and you have $0 in your checking account to float the difference, you are functionally bankrupt.
Wow.
You cannot pay the mortgage with paper equity. Very, very few people have the personal liquidity to sustain a $25,000 monthly bleed for more than a few months.
This is where the dominoes start to fall. If you don't have the cash reserves, you are forced to liquidate properties to stop the bleeding. But you can't sell the vacant, undesirable properties quickly without taking a massive loss. So you either sell your best properties to save the bad ones, or the bank forecloses on you. And remember that massive tax cheat code we talked about earlier, the accelerated depreciation.
This is where it becomes a weapon used against you.
How so?
If the bank forecloses on the property, or you are forced into a panic-driven short sale, the IRS considers that a disposition of the asset. They force the recapture of all that accelerated depreciation immediately.
No way.
Yes. So not only did you lose the property to the bank, but the IRS hands you a six-figure tax bill for phantom income you never actually received. It can unravel decades of accumulated wealth in a matter of 90 days.
It is an absolute cascade of disaster. So how do the professionals survive the winter? How do you balance the aggressive tax benefits of leverage with the absolute necessity of risk management?
There is a highly disciplined strategy that counteracts this boomtown blindness. Instead of trying to acquire 30 doors as fast as possible to impress people on the internet, the smart players advocate for a fortress mentality.
The fortress mentality.
Yeah, they recommend buying slowly, maybe 1 or 2 quality properties a year. But crucially, they intentionally focus on taking the cash flow from the portfolio and using it to pay off 1 or 2 of those properties completely.
Ah, so they create a free and clear fortress.
Exactly. Think about the mechanics of this. If you own just 1 or 2 properties outright with 0 mortgage debt, those specific properties are generating pure, unadulterated positive cash flow. No bank is taking a cut. Depending on the market, 2 paid-off properties might generate $5,000 to $8,000 a month in free cash. You then use that secure, untouchable income stream as a massive insurance policy to protect the rest of your highly leveraged portfolio.
So if the market dips and you have 3 vacancies in your leveraged properties, you don't panic. The $8,000 a month coming from the fortress properties easily covers the mortgage shortfall on the vacant units. You sleep soundly at night.
Exactly.
Furthermore, owning a property free and clear gives you the ultimate emergency lever. You can take out a line of credit against that unencumbered asset if you ever faced a catastrophic black swan event.
It provides absolute staying power, but it requires ignoring the spreadsheet. Mathematically, in a frictionless vacuum, taking that $8,000 a month and using it to buy more mortgaged properties will yield a higher eventual net worth. Maximum leverage yields maximum theoretical return.
I'm so glad you brought up the spreadsheet because that is the exact argument the aggressive internet gurus make. They say inflation is 4%, your mortgage is 3%, the bank is paying you to borrow money. Why would you ever trap your cash in a paid-off house? You are sacrificing massive future growth for comfort.
And they are mathematically correct until the exact moment they get punched in the mouth by reality. The strategy of paying off a property is an acknowledgement of human psychology and structural risk. The investors who maximize leverage at all times are playing a high-stakes game of musical chairs.
Right.
They make the absolute most money while the music is playing. But if the music stops, if a pandemic hits and the government halts evictions, or if a major local employer goes bankrupt and they don't have liquid cash or unencumbered assets, they lose their entire net worth. Paying off a property is about building a hull on your ship that is thick enough to survive hitting an iceberg.
That is the perfect transition into the psychological reality of this game, because transitioning from a consumer to an investor requires a profound, painful shift in your emotional risk tolerance. Which brings us to what we call the castaway strategy, because knowing the math is useless if you panic at the first sign of trouble.
The psychology of investing is arguably more critical than the math. If you cannot manage your own terror, you will self-destruct your portfolio. We actually have a deeply personal story that illustrates this psychological barrier perfectly.
Is this the Provo townhome guy again?
Yes. So we talked earlier about the guy who bought the Provo townhome, rented out the rooms, wiped out his student loans, and felt like a genius. Well, a few years later, he decides to scale up. He buys his second house, and his personal financial exposure explodes. His primary mortgage jumps from $879 a month to $2,600 a month.
That's a huge jump.
And furthermore, to make the down payment on the new house, he took out an $80,000 second mortgage on his original townhome.
He vastly increased his leverage, and his monthly burn rate skyrocketed. He is playing with the big boys now.
And then the nightmare scenario unfolds. He was attempting to self-manage his rentals to save a few bucks on property management fees. Within a 2-week period, he loses 5 out of his 7 renters.
Oh my.
And because he was an amateur, he didn't have ironclad lease contracts in place to protect himself or guarantee the income. He is suddenly staring down massive, compounded mortgage payments with a fraction of the necessary income.
The physical reaction he describes is terrifying. He didn't just get stressed, he had a full-blown panic attack. He physically collapsed under the weight of the debt. He ended up having to liquidate the new home to save himself.
Yeah, he entered a short sale.
He owed $368,000 to the bank and was forced to sell it for $325,000. He moved back into his original townhome, completely defeated, owing $80,000 more than when he left it. It was a brutal, scarring lesson in the realities of leverage.
But during the absolute lowest point of that panic attack, he called his father and asked, "Can I back out of this? Can I just quit?" And his father gave him a piece of advice that serves as the thesis for professional investing. He said, "Son, this is not a time for feeble knees. Get up, go to work, and make the mortgage."
Not a time for feeble knees. Because courage is absolutely required if you want to break out of the middle class. It is going to be incredibly uncomfortable. And this is where the castaway analogy perfectly captures the transition.
Like the Tom Hanks movie.
Yes. Think of the movie where Tom Hanks is marooned on the desert island. He realizes he cannot stay on the island forever. He wants to escape. So he looks out at the terrifying, violent ocean. He hops into this tiny, half-inflated rubber life raft with a makeshift paddle, and he tries to brute force his way out past the crashing waves.
And he gets absolutely decimated. The waves swamp the raft, throw him violently back onto the razor-sharp coral, and he severely cuts his leg. He almost dies trying to fight the ocean with pure willpower. He had the courage, but his methodology was suicidal.
He didn't have a system, he just had desperation. But later in the movie, his approach changes entirely. He stops trying to fight the ocean, he studies the tidal patterns, he figures out exactly which month the winds will be favorable to push him out past the breakers.
Right.
He spends weeks meticulously binding logs together to build a robust structure. And crucially, he builds a sail out of a piece of metal he salvaged. He needed the right timing, the right structural integrity, and the right tools. Only then could his courage actually result in escaping the island.
Real estate investing is exactly the same mechanic. You need the courage to launch the raft, to buy that first property. But if you try to self-manage complex properties without contracts, if you don't understand the tax codes, and if you over-leverage your debt, you are just paddling a half-inflated rubber raft into a financial hurricane. You will get swamped by the first wave of vacancy.
So how do you build the sail? How do you bind the logs? You build your team. The foundational realization of the wealthy is that you do not need to know everything. There is a concept called who, not how.
That's a brilliant concept. If you don't know how to legally protect your assets from a lawsuit, you don't need to spend 400 hours reading corporate law textbooks. You just need to hire the who that already knows the how.
Exactly. You need a specialized CPA who actually understands real estate cost segregation, not just a bookkeeper who does your taxes in April. You need a structural attorney. You need a financial planner and a highly competent mortgage professional.
Let's focus on the attorney's role for a moment because it is paramount. We need to discuss the corporate veil. When you start acquiring multiple properties, your liability exposure goes up exponentially. You absolutely cannot hold 5 rental properties in your personal name.
Why not?
If something catastrophic happens, if a tenant slips on an icy staircase at property A and suffers a traumatic brain injury, they are going to sue. And if you own the properties in your personal name, the plaintiff's attorney will come after property A, property B, property C, your personal primary residence, and your children's college fund.
You lose the entire empire over one patch of ice.
Exactly. So your attorney's job is to build the watertight compartments on your ship. They set up individual LLCs, limited liability companies, for each asset. Property A goes into LLC A. Property B goes into LLC B. You systematically silo the risk.
That makes perfect sense.
If the tenant sues LLC A, they can only access the equity trapped inside LLC A. The corporate veil protects the rest of the fleet. And you supplement that structure with massive multi-million-dollar umbrella insurance policies.
But there's a catch with LLCs, isn't there?
There is. Maintaining that corporate veil requires intense daily operational discipline. You have to keep the finances completely, radically separate. If you use the debit card from LLC A to buy paint for property B, or if you pay for your personal groceries out of the LLC checking account, a judge will claim you are commingling funds.
And what does that mean?
They will pierce the corporate veil, disregard the LLC entirely, and come after your personal assets anyway.
Which is exactly why you need the CPA and the attorney managing the structure. You shouldn't be the one reading every legal clause or managing the QuickBooks ledgers. You let the professionals maintain the hull of the ship while you stand on the deck and look at the horizon to find the next deal.
This systemic delegation is what allows you to manage the emotional fear of investing. Which brings us to the golf analogy.
Oh, this is hands down the best analogy for managing financial anxiety. There is a legendary story about a professional golfer. It's debated whether it was Arnold Palmer or Johnny Miller standing on the tee box of a terrifying championship deciding hole. The hole is a nightmare. There are thick trees out of bounds on the left, deep sand traps running down the right side, and a massive water hazard guarding the front of the green.
Okay, I can picture it.
The caddy is standing next to him, holding the yardage book and listing off all these hazards. The caddy is giving him all the catastrophic things that could go wrong. And the golfer finally turns to the caddy and says, "Stop talking to me about the problems. Stop telling me where the water is. What do I have to do?"
And the caddy looks at the book and simply says, hit it 265 yards, slightly fading, straight down the middle.
Thank you. And the golfer steps up, ignores the water, ignores the sand, and hits the ball 265 yards down the middle. When it comes to our personal wealth, we are so incredibly attached to the hazards. We are terrified of the water.
We really are. We obsess over the fear of vacancy, the fear of interest rates spiking, the fear of a bad tenant destroying the carpet, the fear of a market crash. We freeze on the tee box.
Exactly.
Having an unemotional team of professionals, the attorney, the CPA, the mentor, acts as your caddy. They are not emotionally attached to your money. They look at your chaotic portfolio, they look at the tax code, and they say, stop staring at the water hazard. Stop obsessing over the negative $500 cash flow in year one. Here is the 1031 exchange timeline. Here's the cost segregation study. Hit the ball 265 yards down the middle.
The transition from an amateur to a professional wealth builder is entirely about replacing emotional reactivity with systemic execution. The pros on your team provide the blueprint for the system. You just have to provide the discipline and the courage to execute the swing. If you are terrified of making a financial mistake right now, that is normal.
Completely normal.
You are staring at high prices and feeling like the window of opportunity is closed forever. But the reality is that the mechanisms of wealth, the amortization, the tax codes, the demographic demand for housing are still functioning perfectly in the background. Even the guys teaching the seminars have had panic attacks. They've bought bad deals. They've been foreclosed on. But their willingness to build a better raft, to study the tides, and to stay in the ocean is what determines their long-term survival.
You just have to know when to launch the raft and who to put in the boat with you.
We have mapped out an immense amount of the hidden landscape today. We started with the accidental investor, proving that you don't need to be a Wall Street titan to win. You just need to acquire an asset, perhaps simply your primary residence, and let the macroeconomic forces of time and inflation do the heavy lifting. We dismantled the amateur obsession with day one cash flow and revealed the four pillars: the compounding power of appreciation, the forced savings account of principal paydown, and the inflation hedging reality of rental increases.
And we expose the tax cheat codes designed by the IRS, utilizing cost segregation and MACRS to accelerate depreciation and wipe out your taxable income, and executing the 1031 exchange to continuously defer capital gains, rolling your equity into larger and larger assets.
We also confronted the very real structural dangers of boomtown blindness, proving that hyper-leverage without liquid cash reserves will trigger a foreclosure and a catastrophic tax bomb.
And finally, we established the castaway strategy, Siloing your risk behind a corporate veil and relying on a team of unemotional professionals to guide your execution.
Buying the right assets, securing the right debt, and holding it for the long term are the ultimate keys to this engine. But before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final provocative concept to mull over. We talked extensively about the step up in basis, the ultimate cheat code where you pass a massive tax-free real estate empire down to your heirs, completely wiping out decades of deferred liabilities. If that is the mechanical endpoint of this entire game, how does that change the fundamental nature of what you are doing with your life? Are you just trying to build up a little cash flow so you can play golf in retirement? Or are you, right now, effectively acting as the founding patriarch or matriarch of a multi-generational endowment?
It completely shifts the horizon of your life's work. You are no longer investing for your own lifespan. You are investing for a timeline you will never see.
It really does. And if you are building an endowment, how much financial education do you owe the next generation? Because you can hand your children a $10 million tax-free real estate portfolio when you die. But if they don't understand the cap rate, if they don't understand the corporate veil, if they don't have the discipline to maintain the cash reserves, they will dismantle and squander the shade of the trees that you spent your entire lifetime planting.
Leaving them the wealth is not enough. You have to actively teach them how to read the blueprints. Wealth without the wisdom to manage it is merely a delayed disaster.
Exactly. This is the Brick by Brick channel, where we help beginners build wealth through real estate, one brick at a time. If you got value from this, hit the like and subscribe for weekly investor breakdowns. Keep questioning the basics, keep building your team, and keep exploring the hidden systems that run the world around you.